Hello everyone and welcome to today's ISPI event. I'm Matteo Villa, a research fellow at ISPI, and today we will be talking about the race to vaccines and vaccinations in the Middle East and North Africa region. Over the past few months, we Europeans have been constantly reading in the news that the EU is lagging behind in its race to vaccinate its inhabitants, if compared with the United States and the UK. But as the fighting rages between high-income countries, already a hint that something else is moving just beyond Europe's borders continues to echo in our ears. That is data coming from Israel, which as of today is the first country in the world to have already administered more than 100 doses of vaccine per 100 inhabitants. So just compare it to the fact that Europe is currently at 1/10 of that figure, just below 10 doses administered per 100 inhabitants. And even when focusing on Israel or on other rich countries in the MENA region, such as the United Arab Emirates or Bahrain, who are leading the global vaccine race, we often lose sight of the huge challenge experienced by governments just beyond Europe's borders. More than 100 countries in the world haven't even started vaccinating their populations yet. And in the Middle East and North Africa region, for instance, Jordan has administered just 1.5 doses per 100 inhabitants, Lebanon sits at 0.9, Algeria stands at 0.2, and Egypt and Iran are still close to 0. So when we look at the global picture, what the vaccine race tells us again and again is a tale of inequality that we at ISPI have often been talking about over the past few months. A tale of inequality that mirrors other inequalities that have widened during the current pandemic. Inequalities of opportunities, income inequalities, different state capacities, the recurrence of conflicts, and their concentration in specific world regions. And it is a tale of inequality that is also mirrored specifically within the Middle East and North Africa region, where some countries, as I showed you, are leading the vaccine race, while some others lag terribly behind. So this is why today, to talk about this race and its effects on the region and beyond, I will be joined by three distinguished speakers. So let me introduce them. We will start from Mr. Ahmed Al-Mandari, Regional Director for the Eastern Mediterranean at the World Health Organization. Welcome, Mr. Al-Mandari. We will then follow up with Ms. Thank you. We will then follow up with Ms. Yoko Akasaka, Senior Situation Coordinator at the MENA Regional Office of the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees. Welcome, Yoko. And we will close with Professor Eckert Wirtz, Director of the Giga Institute for Middle East Studies. So welcome, the Director as well. So I'm asking the speakers to please keep to their allotted time of 10 minutes each, so that we can open up the floor to questions from our virtual audience that's following us on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or directly from our websites. And to our audience, please post your questions on the platform you're using, so that ISPI staff can send them to me and I can pass them on to our guests. So after this introduction, let me start from our first speaker, Mr. Al-Mandari, with a general question. Tomorrow, it will be 11th of March. It will mark exactly 1 year since your organization, the World Health Organization, declared COVID-19 to be a public health emergency of international concern, in a nutshell, a pandemic. What do you think the international community has learned throughout this year?
Thank you very much, and can you hear me, please?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this chance to join this important platform, and I'm really pleased to come back again, discussing the issue of COVID-19 pandemic and whatever subsequent work that have been done. And answering your question, I fully agree with you that there are many lessons that are learned by every country around, the globe. Many lessons learned by healthcare systems and countries as a whole, as well as UN and then non-UN agencies when it comes into preparedness to emergencies in general, and pandemics in specific, such as the current one which we are suffering from. These lessons are touching every aspect of public health when we talk about healthcare systems, communication, resource mobilization, holistic approach, the whole of government, as well as the whole of society, and the interaction between the two, unity, solidarity, agility, and whatever values. Now, when it comes into the vaccine, because it is the topic of today's discussion, there are also many lessons that we learned from. One of them is collaboration and partnership across the globe. As you have said, having that sort of spirit, collaboration, unity, solidarity, and partnership when it comes into the vaccine availability, it really will help us improve our understanding of the disease first and the immune response by doing a lot of solidarity trials and whatsoever studies and researches to make sure that whatever outcomes that are coming from the implementation of these sort of vaccines will definitely help us to make the right decision on the right strategy as well as the right vaccine to be selected. And also it helps us to make sure that whatever resources available in rich, well-resourced countries are not really contained only for their own countries or communities, but it is shared with many other countries which are low resourced or lacking the resources, either financial or technical, to support their communities and make sure that no one is left behind. So collaboration and partnership is one of the big lessons that we have learned from since the beginning of the pandemic. The shared responsibility as well, as you said, we have many countries around the globe and here in IMRO that have reached a high number of rates of vaccination per population, whereas other countries have not yet even started. They are at zero level, not even above zero. So this is something that we try to send to our countries based on the lesson we learned, that let us have that shared responsibility from the humanitarian aspect, but as well as from the fact that no one is safe until every one of us in the region and beyond is really saved by giving the vaccine, especially the vulnerable group, and adhering to the first target of this sort of vaccination campaign. So this is what I just wanted to share with you. Back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Al-Madari. So nobody is safe until everyone is safe. This is the main message of the WHO. We've heard it many times, but it's very important to repeat it as much as possible. We are never safe in a globalized world where everyone can travel, and hopefully we'll resume traveling soon. So let me follow up with a more specific question on the Middle East. As vaccination rates vary widely between countries, as we've seen, what do you think are the specific lessons that we can learn from the Middle East vaccine race right now? And in particular, where do you think the MENA region is doing okay? Why? And maybe where is it lacking behind and should do more to get out from the emergency? And finally, maybe how can multilateral efforts help the region to overcome the emergency?
I'd like us to share with you updates on the vaccination status. As of 7th March, 15 countries in Myanmar started vaccination with COVID-19 vaccine, different types of vaccines. Most of these countries, received vaccination through either bilateral agreements or donations from friendly countries. However, I'm glad to say that 3 countries have so far received, these sort of shipments or vaccine shipments through COVAX facility. And these include Sudan, which is the first country which received the vaccine, and Djibouti and Afghanistan. Somalia is on the way, and some other countries are on the way this week and next week. So this is something that we are really proud of, this COVAX facility and partnership spirit. As you know, countries here in IMRO, 2/3 of them are suffering from either acute or protracted emergencies, conflicts, and other humanitarian challenges, which are making these countries weak when it comes into the healthcare system. And they rely on COVAX for accessing the vaccine. So that is the challenge which we are facing. But at the same time, we have done a lot of work since last year until now to develop the capacity of these countries, developing the national sort of plans, sharing it with the global COVAX facility, and also looking at the operational level to make sure that whenever the vaccines are deployed, it will be well utilized and there is no waste. What are the lessons that we have learned at a regional level? There are many. Maintain solidarity and unity values on sharing resources, as I said before. And it has been done, in fact, since the beginning of the pandemic, but we are pleading and urging countries to do it more at this time. Enhance local production through multilateral collaboration. As you can see, there is a shortage of vaccines. The production lines are not yet ready to cope with the high demand. So this is something that we are working with our member states which have the capacity. bring the regional one voice to support the COVAX facility, and not to have these sort of bilaterals away from the COVAX facility. At a country level, the lessons that we have learned: strengthen the healthcare systems, especially when it comes into the expanded program of immunization, which is really the asset of many countries that have undergone acute or chronic emergencies, which helped them, in fact, to control many of the outbreaks, like polio, for example. Promote risk communication and communities engagement, which is now the key success, if I may call it, factor when it comes into getting the population vaccinated whenever it is available, and enhance local communities' awareness about the vaccine and the importance of the vaccine, and fight the infodemics that WHO have been calling since the beginning of the pandemic, to make sure that we are getting the right information from the right source. And my last comment is strengthening the national information system, which I feel without which we will not be able to identify what the challenge is and what gaps we have, what strengths we have, and make plans that will help us move in a very strong manner and saving lives, leaving no one behind, particularly the vulnerable groups in each communities in the region here and around the globe. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Madari. I think that the most important comment leading us to the second speaker is about engaging local communities, which is absolutely key for almost every country in the world, but in the MENA region, that's something, and the Sub-Saharan African region, that's something that needs to be pointed at. So let me now move to Ms. Akasaka from the MENA Regional Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And Yoko, I wanted to ask you, all over the world, we have seen the asymmetric impact of the pandemic, with vulnerable groups bearing the brunt of it. So from your experience, how have refugees, asylum seekers, and IDPs been hit by the pandemic in the Middle East and North Africa region, and what is the UNHCR doing to cope with the situation?
Right, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting to this panel discussion and talk about refugees and the stateless people of concern to UNHCR. And in particular, thank you for asking these particular questions, because indeed, across MENA regions, the impact on COVID-19 on protection of vulnerable populations and then those living in the economic margin of society has been very much devastating. It has increased the needs for social protection, social safety nets, and livelihood supports needs for this group. UNHCR Regional Bureau for MENA covers 20 countries and operations, and that hosts over 17 million people of concern to UNHCR. That includes 2.6 million refugees, 11.5 million IDPs, and 2.4 million returnees, either refugee or IDP returnees, and then 370,000 stateless populations. It counts for 18% of the global populations of UNHCR's concerns, and it's 46% are under the age of 18. And as you are aware, and as Dr. Al-Madari indicated, this region continues to face multiple crises, from internal conflicts and instability in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya, and to a major economic downturn in Lebanon. In the country where the physical and social infrastructures are already strained due to the conflicts, or where its capacity is already stretched by hosting additional refugee populations, such, the impact of pandemic is much larger. And the policy brief published by ESCOR indicating that migrants and refugees are among the social group most impacted by COVID-19 crisis and are suffering disproportionately from its social and economic consequences. But at the same time, they are also the frontliners of pandemic, providing essential services, including health, cleaning, domestic work, agriculture, food production, and ensuring the continuity of supply chain and across the Arab region. The pandemic has exacerbated vulnerability of refugee and asylum seeker in urban, rural, and campaign contexts, while negatively impacting humanitarian assistance. There are also some instances that asylum seekers have not been able to access asylum country to seek protection, as some countries close the borders. UNHCR and the World Bank jointly conducted a study last year for Lebanon and only three governorates in the Jordan and then Kurdistan region of Iraq. And reports also estimates 4.4 million people in the host communities and 1.1 million refugees or IDPs were driven into poverty in the immediate aftermath of the crisis. So what UNHCR has done to address this situation? And first of all, UNHCR had closely worked with the government and the UN sister agency and the civil society to respond to the crisis. For example, UNHCR, in coordination with the respective Ministry of Health and WHO, provided support to the isolation quarantines and then treatment centers, supported with extra human resources, health resources, and then provision of PPAs and medical equipment, and etc. UNHCR supports host governments to enhance their capacities in providing services and assistance to both refugees and the local communities, local population in an equitable manner. This inclusion approach fosters and improves the national and local levels access to rights, national system and development opportunity for refugees and stateless people and marginalized community in hosting them. Inclusion is recognized as more sustainable approach than creating parallel structure to assist refugee and displaced populations, and also promotes greater social cohesion. And of course, the UNHCR continue to activities to protect refugees from the short and long-term impacts of pandemic. And activities include healthcare, water sanitation, hygiene activities, and also scale up activities to support education, livelihood, psychosocial care, and the prevention, in particular prevention response to the sexual and gender-based violences. We continue to support also the community engagement and encourage more the community outreach activities.
Thank you, Ms. Sakasaka. I think that you painted a picture of, an approach that usually is called a whole of government. So we need to work together instead of creating parallel lines. But my follow-up question is this, because we know that often refugees, IDPs, asylum seekers lag behind in terms of access to services and many other things. So do you expect that vaccinations will improve the picture for refugees and other vulnerable groups? And by this I mean, will these groups be able to access vaccinations, or do you fear they will be left behind? What's your view from UNHCR?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, I hope and then believe vaccination will improve the health and social and economic situation and the entire life of them as a whole, just like for anybody else. And I do hope that all the displaced population states people have equitable access to the COVID-19 vaccines. And UNHCR is aware that many countries in MENA regions provided COVID-19 related service to the displaced and then stateless population and beyond on par with their citizens. And the spirit of nobody's safe until everybody's safe has been very much respected in the response to the COVID-19 issues in this region. And we expect the same for the COVID-19 vaccination campaign in this region. UNHCR's message is the following. COVID-19 vaccination plan must not discriminate. Pandemic will only be brought under control when vaccines are available on equal basis to all the populations, regardless of their status. Health, as you indicated, while it is a fundamental human right, but often refugees and asylum seekers, stateless people, and the IDPs themselves are, although they are citizens, are often excluded from health system because of the lack of inclusive approaches, language barriers and documentation or cost for various reasons. So we are appealing to all the countries to include refugees, stateless population and other displaced population in their vaccine programs, on par with nationals and in line with COVAX allocation principles. As I indicated, inclusion is a key to protecting refugees, IDPs, displaced populations, and their host communities from health responses, vaccine, social safety nets, and safeguarding their health also protect the health of their host communities and societies. It is not in the interest of any community, state, or for the world at large to have people falling through the cracks, marginalized, exposed, and unprotected. and refugees, IDP, all other displaced population and stateless people and their local community must be included in all the national responses to pandemic on an equal footing as citizens. As for the displaced and stateless population in MENA region, UNHCR is getting positive message, positive indication that majority of countries are taking inclusive approaches. Of course, UNHCR will continue to monitor and to implementation to ensure they are indeed included in the government vaccine programs and have access to the vaccinations. UNHCR also alerts the government and the partners that sometimes there are barriers refugees, IDPs, and stressed people might face in accessing vaccines. For example, language barriers we discussed, and then including also the registration issues and such. I also want to emphasize UNHCR's advocacy efforts in the region are largely successful because of the support provided to humanitarian communities. As Dr. Al-Mandari indicated, partnership, solidarities, shared responsibility has been the key element in successful advocacy efforts of UNHCR. UNHCR continue to coordinate with immunization activity with National Immunization Program and health authorities, partners, UNICEF and WHO, and of course, civil societies. UNHCR will continue working with the communities also to ensure that information is available to all, right to information is available, and it counters the risk of misinformation on the vaccine and the pandemic and stigmatization and the xenophobias. We will continue to work across the region and globally to advocate inclusion and equitable inclusion for refugees and then displaced population, and all the population in the world to have access to vaccinations. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Sakazaki. So let's continue to fight, to work towards inclusion, and the UNHCR is certainly doing this, as well as the World Health Organization. So thanks a lot. Let me remind those of you are in the audience who are following us on Zoom that you can pose questions. Just look at the chat button and then you can ask questions and they will be sent to me. So do it, don't be afraid. So let me conclude the first round with Professor Wirtz, the director of the Giga Institute for Middle East Studies. And to him, my first question is, looking at vaccination rates across the region, we see that some countries are far ahead of the rest. We mentioned them earlier. Leading the pack are the usual suspects, so Israel, the Gulf countries in particular, that have the financial resources to procure and the logistical capacity to administer thousands of doses per day. And lagging behind are those countries that have little to no financial room and lower state capacity. So as I said, it's a picture of inequality across the region, one you wrote about many times in the past. And where do you think this could bring us?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would like to add to this inequality picture that you've outlined that not all Gulf countries are that ahead. Actually, Saudi Arabia is quite lagging behind, while other countries that are not that rich are actually leading in the Middle East. For example, Morocco and Turkey, both of which have higher vaccination rates at the moment than European countries. So yes, I think financial wherewithal is definitely important, but also this issue of state capacity that you have mentioned, and sometimes obviously individual policy decisions in these respective states. How that will develop further going ahead, we will need to see, but it's quite remarkable this success so far in Morocco and Turkey, both of which have heavily relied on Chinese supplies, Sinovac in the case of Turkey and Sinopharm in the case of Morocco. And also the United Arab Emirates have heavily relied on Sinopharm, while at the same time also approving all other vaccines, Sputnik, the Russian ones, BioNTech, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and clearly having an interest of possibly developing in some sort of vaccine trading hub and playing a role beyond its border. That is already discernible in the case of the UAE. Also in the case of Israel, you might have seen this diplomatic deal, prisoner exchange between Syria and Israel recently, where Israeli purchase of Sputnik vaccine was used as a kind of transaction currency. Also Morocco with a kind of idea of its own version of vaccine diplomacy, for example, towards West Africa. So we will need to see how this plays out. State capacity is one important aspect. The other aspect, financial wherewithal and planning ahead, but also plans for their own versions of vaccine diplomacy in the region and beyond. And one could also argue, like in other cases, probably COVID and this race for vaccination might reinforce some trends that we have seen before already. For example, it might strengthen populist or authoritarian incumbents of government in Israel, Turkey, Morocco, for example. It's striking that in all three countries the leaders have been under certain pressure, and a successful COVID vaccination campaign will possibly, most likely, strengthen them. Also, a reorientation of foreign policy priorities. We clearly see that Russia and China are very active in trying to enter that market. We have seen yesterday a very strongly worded remark by the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, who pointed to the efforts of the Chinese and Russians there and pointed to, in his view, superior multilateral initiatives in the form of COVAX on part of the Europeans. So we clearly see here a positioning, and we will need to see how this plays out, these kind of foreign policy reorientations. And I think a third factor of third prior trend that also plays into these whole vaccination campaigns is misinformation and disinformation, something not only societies in the MENA are grappling. We have it in Europe, we have it in America. A lot of people are highly skeptical of vaccinations, sometimes, if not most often, for pretty irrational reasons. Having said that, it is really a challenge. Just to give you an example, I had a conversation with a Jordanian researcher, and apparently in Jordan, less than 10% of those people who would be eligible for a vaccination early on have registered. So this misinformation, sometimes possibly disinformation from interested government, clearly takes its toll, and here is a strong case to be made for a transparent information policy, but also governments need to stay on message. And of course, there should be definitely, governments should refrain from trying to use this vaccination story for ulterior foreign policy gains, because the situation is simply too serious.
Thank you, Professor. I think you've made it perfectly clear that the role of information is key, but you also mentioned the role of external actors. And as we know, the MENA region, especially in these years, has been repopulated by a lot of foreign actors that want to influence within the region. So let me come back to you on this. And so, how do you assess this role of the external actors? Do you think that it may prove in the end beneficial in this competition for influencing, but also showing that, for instance, Russia or China can be more equitable in the distribution of vaccines towards the region as compared to the European neighbors or the US? Or do you think that this could worsen maybe some conflicts in regional scenarios? And secondly, maybe within the region, between countries, you mentioned Morocco, which has a higher vaccination rate than the EU as a whole. But let's look at Algeria, just next to its border. It's below 0.5% of people vaccinated in the country. So do you think that this could worsen, like the race in the MENA region, but also maybe the ways in which each country looks at each other?
I mean, first of all, external actors are very important, because the MENA itself is not developing and producing these vaccines so far. Also, the vaccines in Israel, they are coming from Belgium, right? So I think it's very important, this form of cooperation. And as I've said, I guess every vaccine is welcome as long as it is working. And the Chinese vaccines have already played a very pivotal role in those three countries, Morocco, Turkey and the UAE, and also in others. Egypt has received quite a lot. But I would expect that Western vaccines distributed via COVAX also will gain increasing traction as they are ramping up production quite considerably over the coming months. And I could imagine a scenario where in the second half of the year it will be a bit like with masks last year. In March and April we had a shortage. And late now there are masks everywhere, so I would hope towards the end of the year and certainly in 2022 it will be similar, so that the challenge will be more how to administer those vaccines. And then of course you are talking, like you said, about state capacity and of about the initiatives of these respective states. And at this stage there are considerable differences. Whether and how they will level out over time, we will need to see.
Thanks a lot. So, I mean, this paints a complex picture that clearly cannot be untackled just right here. But thank you for helping us in and leading us in having a look at the region. So I will open up the floor to debate, and we already received a number of questions from our audience. And I would like to, go back to from the start, and so go back to Mr. Amandari and having a look at what we hear from our audience. So I will read them right now, and we have a few chosen questions for you. So, seeing the current delay in the arrival of vaccines, so let's say that also the MENA region is clearly lagging behind, given that it's a process that's accumulating delays over time. What actions can be taken to ensure the availability of vaccine and the related supplies for routine immunization programs? So, looking at the longer term, do you think that these delays will then be secured in other ways, or will this stay with us, especially with middle and low-income countries and maybe middle and low-income regions that do not have the same reach and clout as high-income countries? And maybe the second one is, can you recommend anything on forecasting and managing and shipping the vaccine supplies, especially in vulnerable contexts affected by conflict, climate emergencies, or displacement? And I will translate it. I mean, how can we ensure that vaccines are delivered and secured and provided to populations often affected by conflict, in which it's harder to provide even just food supplies?
Thank you very much. And in fact, just answering the first question, I must go back to what Prof. Iskart has mentioned. Compared, to last year when we started the pandemic, there was a huge shortage of personal protective equipment to healthcare staff, masks, and a lot of diagnostic facilities and items. But with time, with solidarity, unity, partnership, collaboration, these sort of items have been made available in a very fast manner and shipped, in fact, to countries, although we were facing difficulties for logistic operations because of the closure of airports and flights, cancellation, these sort of things. I feel it will be the same for the vaccine. Yes, now we are witnessing a sort of competition on already a shortage of vaccines available in the market. But, since we started the first sort of shipments to countries through the COVAX facility, I feel, in 2 weeks' time, we made a very good progress through this COVAX facility by shipping, vaccines to the countries, particularly those countries which are low-resourced and they could not manage to make bilateral deals, to get the vaccines. And those countries which their diplomatical level could not enable them to make sort of deals for donations. So I'm optimistic. Yes, we are facing logistic challenges, availability and also shipments, but I'm optimistic based on the experiences we have had. Look at, for example, Sudan. It is facing emergencies. but it is one of the first countries which received the shipment. Look at, for example, in Africa and in Baho, these countries received the first shipments, were facing difficulties, but we managed to get them. So I'm optimistic in the coming weeks it is going to be better. And in fact, it has been declared or announced that we are targeting 20% of the population in each country by the end of 2021. But now we are planning and working hardly with our partners and donors to go beyond the 20%, even 30 to maybe 50%, because the production will be increased. The second question, reaching those vulnerable groups in countries facing difficulties and conflicts, as what is mentioned by Yoko, that we are working together to make sure that refugees, migrants, internally displaced people are not missed. And that's why we are collaborating as a WHO with different UN agencies to make sure that those people are really reached and will not be forgotten and missed. And negotiations with our national authorities that this group of people will be included in their national vaccination plans. And in fact, most of the documents that have been submitted to the WHO, they are included in the plan. And we will make sure that they'll be given this sort of right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Mandari. I must say, it's true, the COVAX facility is really shifting into gearing. It's gearing up to deliver, because just look at the statistics. In the past few weeks alone, we've seen 60 million doses being delivered and more than 50 million being ordered by countries. So, I mean, it's an important multilateral effort that we need to stress that it proves that it can work. So it's important to stress this. And turning to Yoko with a follow-up question. So Ms. Akasaka, the question from our audience is follows up neatly with the ones for Mr. Al-Mandari. Could NGOs and or charities play a role in supporting vaccination campaigns in the MENA region? And if so, how and by what means? So can the civil society play a role, and how? And do you see it already playing in the MENA region?
Thank you. Indeed, so civil society, NGO, charity organizations have been playing a significant role already. As I indicated, advocacy is one issue, and they have played a significant role advocating inclusion of vulnerable population, including refugees, displaced people, and other displaced population large. But also, they have been closely working with government authority and the coordination structures. In particular, the vaccination campaign program has been pretty much supported by WHO and UNICEF. And then WHO is playing a significant role in coordinating the humanitarian communities, including civil societies, and also with the government, in particular Ministry of Health. And not only logistical administration of vaccination program, but also information sharing, the outreach in the communities, and also getting the information, what the challenges are, and then what is working, what is not working. And all this information is very important. And those information are mostly coming from civil society and charity organization, because they have the close contact with these individuals. And I'm not talking about only refugees or stateless people, or people concerned to UNHCR. I'm talking about disabled populations and old population, which having already difficulties to have access to different services in general. And indeed, NGO charities, I really encourage, they should be, I'm encouraging them to be a part of the coordination structures, and they're working closely with the these humanitarian communities and coordination structure. They do have a significant role to play. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Akasaka. Absolutely. It's obvious, but it's important to stress the role that even in the MENA region, NGOs and civil society can play in this effort, both in communication campaigns and also, directly in the distribution and helping people getting vaccinated. So, moving back to Professor Wirtz, we have two questions for you, which are possibly related. One about another external actor, because we talked about Russia and China, but the European Union seems to be missing from the picture. So do you have any comment on this, on the fact that the European Union doesn't seem to be playing a role in the MENA region so far as the vaccination campaign is still lagging behind here? And the second one is pertains mostly to regional coordination structures. So do you see any regional coordination structures emerging, right? For instance, purchasing and procuring vaccines together, or do you think that in the end, let's say, fractures and divisions in the region will prevail, and so we will be back to vaccine nationalism with so many differences in inoculations and administration, procurement, staying with us for longer?
Well, I think the European Union does quite a lot via COVAX, or intends to do quite a lot. It hasn't talked about it that much, and I guess that is why Charles Michel yesterday went on the record and pointing out some factors that are at play. So I think the EU is not that inactive, right? They were instrumental in launching the COVAX initiative, which is a multilateral initiative. It wasn't the US, right? The US would not even be a member of COVAX if Trump would have been re-elected. So I think the Europeans were quite active, but they did not really do good marketing. They certainly could advertise their position better. On the other hand, yes, unless the European vaccination campaign is not fully developed, deliveries will probably still be more limited for COVAX. This slogan, nobody is safe until everybody is safe, it's very nice, but let's face it, some are safer than others, yeah. Until this is being the case, and I think until the summertime, when Europe and the US hopefully will have vaccinated a large part of their population, we will see a considerable increase in such deliveries. So could there be more? Of course, but I think the European Union overall is not doing that badly compared to the Chinese and Russian. It just had maybe a less aggressive marketing, but that seems to be changing as we speak. And in the longer run, Europe is definitely well positioned to be a major factor in the fight against this virus, right? It is the largest producer of vaccines in the world, and especially those vaccines with mRNA technology are better placed to adapt to new mutations and so on going ahead, because most likely we are speaking not about one-off vaccinations. We probably will need to get used to a reality where we will have several vaccinations over a couple of years in order to have booster shots or to receive shots that are good for certain mutations. Thanks.
I think that I will follow up with another question to you, Professor, because it follows up neatly to the fact that you pointed at the fact that, not all vaccines are the same, and maybe if these mRNA vaccines prove to be better, then it might be, more of a challenge in distributing them, given that at least for now they need, more cooling and more refrigeration than other vaccines. But anyway, so many of our audience seems to be looking at the mid to long term, and as you pointed out, the vaccination campaign will continue to be, let's say, rolling out probably, or in the future as the virus mutates and we continue to keep up with it as well as we do usually in the, let's say, high-income countries and in the West world with seasonal influenza virus. So, do you expect that these kind of inequalities that are emerging in distribution that mirror quite neatly those who we see, that we see in other ways, state capacity, income inequality, and so on, will stay with us in the future? Do you fear that this will be the case, or do you think that maybe as we roll out the vaccination campaign, then these inequalities will tend to smooth out as the vaccination campaign becomes easier for everybody?
Well, I mean, there are certain price differentials as well, right, between the mRNA vaccines and, for example, AstraZeneca. There are also considerable differentials between the prices that one client pays and another one pays. But overall, AstraZeneca is well below €5, if I'm correct, right? So I think that should be affordable for most countries, and if not, it should be made affordable for all countries. So going ahead, I think I wouldn't be that pessimistic, and a lot will depend on then state capacities and initiatives on the ground, less so on the availability of vaccines. I think that will be less of an issue once we go towards the end of the year and into 2022. Regarding the regional initiatives, I doubt that we will see some sort of regional initiative, and probably it's not necessary. There is already COVAX, and it's a multilateral initiative, so I don't necessarily see the necessity for a regional initiative. But yes, there are attempts on a kind of bilateral level to use vaccines in foreign policy relations. I've mentioned the UAE, Israel, Morocco. It certainly played a role also in the bilateral relations between China and Turkey. I don't expect any critical words from Mr. Erdogan about the situation of the Uyghur population in China going ahead, for example. So I think we will see a lot of bilateral deals, but in terms of multilateral initiatives, I think the challenge will be more to develop the COVAX initiative.
Thank you. So to follow this up to current vulnerabilities and current let's say inequalities, I wanted to go to Ms. Sakasaka because a question is about the current way in which vaccines are being administered, and our audience is curious to whether have you seen any vaccination campaign being done and reaching out to refugees, because we know that some refugees live in camp settings, some other live in urban settings. So are you aware of anything that's happening in the MENA region that is already rolling out something towards these settings or these vulnerable populations, or do you think that, or maybe are you aware of any lags in the vaccination campaign towards these groups?
Right, thank you very much. As I indicated, we are promoting and advocating for equitable access to the vaccination program, which is run by the national authorities, meaning that we are not expecting any special treatments for refugees or stateless people, but they also have equal access to the national program. And so very often that refugees and then stateless people have to also register themselves in the government platform and to ensure that they are able to have access to the program itself. And some authorities are, mainly the authorities are pretty much on the regional or level setting up the vaccination centers where refugees, stateless people, and other displaced population have access to. For example, now already we see Jordan and largely the refugees have been access. Actually, Jordan is one of the first countries in the globally who started vaccines for refugees itself, and then other countries we have already witnessed the refugees having access to already the vaccinations program, have been vaccinated. Indeed, depending on the country operation that each government, they might go to the refugee camp, they might just wait for refugees to come to the health centers. It's a different. However, we are seeing very much positive indications and implementations, and we'll continue to monitor. Over to you.
Thank you, Sakasaka. Absolutely important to note that vaccination campaigns have started in Jordan for refugees, and that you will be monitoring the situation, because clearly the UNHCR plays a key role in advocating for refugees and other vulnerable groups that might be delayed in having access to vaccines. So thanks a lot. And maybe just to close down and move up to Mr. Al-Mamdari again, maybe the last question that we might give you, and that again follows up neatly with the rest in terms of, you mentioned communication campaigns, the need for, infodemics and maybe disinformation to be eradicated in the Middle East so that everybody is aware that vaccines are safe and are accessible and so on. So do you think that there is an important part to play for interfaith organization and the religious organizations in the Middle East in order to reach out to people and communicate that vaccinations are safe and can be accessed by everyone and should be accessed by everyone?
Yeah, thank you. In fact, just before I answer this question, if you don't mind, I'd like to add what Yoko have mentioned about Jordan. I'm really pleased to say that Jordan is one of the countries who managed to get the support of international, global partners in providing resources specifically and funds specifically dedicated for refugees and migrants. So Jordan is going to provide vaccine free of charge to those group of vulnerables. Answering your question, in fact, we have been working since the beginning of this pandemic with international partners, UN agencies like UNICEF, for example, and health authorities within countries on risk communication and community engagement. Because we felt without strengthening this part of healthcare system and public health, we will not be able to move one step ahead successfully. From the beginning of identifying people who are having the disease, tracing the contacts, providing protective sort of advices, promotive, health promotion messages, up to the point of convincing those people who are having a sort of resistance towards the vaccination in general, but COVID-19 in specific, based on the infodemics. So we have teams here in WHO working with their counterparts at UN agencies, partners, plus member states, to make sure that the right message is sent to the people at the right time, using the right strategies. And we found it really very helpful, as I said, from the beginning of the pandemic until now. But I must say, still, there is a lot of work to be done in order to make sure that everyone is having this sort of positive perception about vaccination. And so make sure that once the vaccine is available, there'll be no hesitance. We are not seeking, low hesitance rate, but we are seeking no hesitance or zero hesitance rate among those people in these communities, including, special campaigns that have been made, as Yoko had mentioned, to refugees, to migrants, and internally displaced people. So this is something that we have been working, and we will continue working in order to make it really strong enough. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to end this event on a positive note. You say we are seeking zero hesitancy rate in vaccinations access, and so this is absolutely a key goal for all of us. We've talked about the difficulty of some countries to access vaccines, but as soon as this will be at least eased by the COVAX facility and other efforts, and national campaigns can come into gear, we will evaluate again, come back into the situation in the next months. So I must thank, I'm very pleased with how this event went, because I must thank our speakers. We managed to do 2 rounds of questions, and this doesn't happen that much, and it's great during these events to be able to have so many follow-up questions. So thanks a lot to the 3 of you. It's been great to have you, and thank you to our audience who has been following us. So follow us on our channels, and we'll see you next time for the next Med event. Again, thank you to the 3 of you. It's been great to have you. Goodbye.